The spires of Virexa Prime pierced the lavender sky. Towers of living crystals that sang a low, harmonic chime when the twin suns brushed their peaks. Inside the Ethel Palace, the sound was a constant soothing reminder of divine order. Princess Sirelia found it suffocating. She stood in a chamber hidden behind the primary throne dais, a room that had not been opened in 8 centuries. Dust, heavy and gray. Coated technology so ancient it was considered myth. Her people, the Virexen, were masters of light, energy, and elegant psionics. They had forgotten this older, cruder magic, the magic of metal, wires, and desperate, screaming power. Sirelia was desperate. She ran a slender, 3-fingered hand over the relic. The eclipse beacon was a dull, black metal disc, cold to the touch. It was heresy to be here, heresy to touch it, and heresy to even think what she was about to do. But her cousin, General Threx, was massing his fleets on the Ort border. Her council was riddled with his spies. Just yesterday, Her Food Highness had collapsed, his insides liquefied by a subtle, untraceable poison meant for her. She was 22 years old, the last of a bloodline that had ruled for 10 millennia, and she was going to be the last. Full stop. Unless the legends were specific. The beacon did not call for an army. It did not summon a Xylos knight with their elegant light lances and coded honor. It was, the texts whispered, a cry to the abyss, a call for the deadliest protector from beyond the known stars, a being unbound by Virexan law, a shadow blade who would appear when all other light had failed. Her fingers, tipped with luminescent gold, traced the activation glyph. This was it. Betray her entire civilization's philosophy of peace and high-minded diplomacy, or be strangled in her sleep by Threx's android assassins. She chose heresy. Sirelia pressed her hand to the disk and pushed her own life energy into the cold metal. It did not hum, it did not glow, it simply drank her energy, greedy and silent. For a terrifying second, nothing happened. Then a sound, a low subsonic thrum that vibrated the dust on the floor. It was not a chime of crystal, it was a growl, a signal, hungry and directional, tearing through the fabric of space-time, screaming one word across the void. Protector. Across the universe, in a spiral arm so mundane it was left uncatalogued. Mason Cross was cleaning his rifle. He lived in a cabin built from rough-hewn pine, nestled in the absolute soaking wet middle of nowhere in the Washington wilderness. His only companion was a generator that coughed diesel smoke and a satellite link that he used only to check global weather patterns, ensuring no one was getting close. Mason was a ghost. The United States government, the one he had served, bled for, and killed for, believed he was dead. He preferred it that way. He was a large man, built not with the sculpted, sterile perfection of a Virexan noble, but with the hard, functional muscle of a life spent carrying heavy things and doing terrible work. Scars, white and angry, mapped his arms and back. His face was a map of bad roads, dominated by dark eyes that had seen too much and a mouth that rarely smiled. He was haunted. He was haunted by the smell of burning mud in the Sumter Valley. He was haunted by the order crackling in his ear, the voice of a general sitting 7,000 miles away. The general had called it a necessary sacrifice. The village, he'd said, was a vector for the bioweapon. Men, women, children, a clean burn. Mason had been the one to pull the trigger. He had been forced at gunpoint by his own squad to follow an order that scorched his soul. He had nightmares of small, dark eyes looking up at him before the world turned white. He lived with that. He lived with it by living away from everything. He was off the grid, off the books, and off his rocker, according to the last person who had tried to talk to him. The beacon's signal found him. It did not arrive as a polite request. It punched through the atmosphere like a bullet. First, the generator died. The single yellow bulb in his cabin extinguished, plunging the room into the gray dusk. Mason was on his feet in an instant, rifle snapped to his shoulder, safety off. The silence was wrong. The air pressure in the cabin dropped, making his ears pop. A sound started. A deep, agonizing thrum that vibrated in his bones. The same sound Cerelia had heard. It was coming from inside his head. No, he growled, thinking it was the government. The psychosis. The breakdown he always knew was coming. A light appeared in the center of his cabin. It was not a light, but a tear in the air. A shimmering vertical slit of impossible geometry, showing a place that was not his cabin, a place of blinding white and blue crystal. He smelled ozone and something sweet, like jasmine. Federal, he snarled, raising the rifle. You are not authorized. The tears widened. It did not ask for permission. It grabbed. A force, physical and immense, clamped onto his center of mass and pulled. His rifle flew from his hands. The cabin walls blurred. He felt a sensation of infinite falling, of being turned inside out, of his atoms being ripped apart and crudely stitched back together. It was violent, agonizing, and lasted less than a second. Mason Cross crashed onto the floor of the Virexan throne room. He landed hard, skidding several yards on the polished, light-infused crystal. A chaotic sprawl of denim, flannel, and mud-caked combat boots. He left a long, dirty smear on the immaculate floor. The singing of the crystal spires was silenced by a collective, horrified gasp. The royal court of Virexa Prime was in full session. Hundreds of nobles draped in fabrics of woven light and wearing masks of social propriety froze. They were discussing the finer points of water trade tariffs with the Hydrus sector. Into this scene of sterile elegance, a savage had been dropped. Mason rolled, coming up into a low combat crouch, his hands automatically searching for weapons that were no longer there. His head pounded. The air was too clean, too sweet. The light was too bright. Where, he growled, his voice a gravel slide in the silent hall. Where the hell am I? He looked up, and his blood ran cold. He was surrounded, tall, slender beings with pale, faintly glowing skin, large golden eyes with no pupils and an air of fragile superiority. They looked like something out of a fantasy novel. Elves, in space. And on a high platform, a throne of pure, uncut crystal, sat the most beautiful and terrified woman he had ever seen. Cerelia stared. This was not what she had expected. The legend spoke of a shadow blade, a warrior of impossible skill and cosmic power. She had envisioned a being of light, or at least someone wearing armor. The creature that had fallen onto her floor was filthy. He was big, far broader and thicker than any Virexan male. He wore crude, heavy blue fibers on his legs and a red and black squared shirt. He had hair on his face, a dark, untamed shadow on his jaw. And he smelled. Oh, the smell. Even from the dais, she could scent it. It was a primal animal odor to sweat, earth, rain, and something else, something metallic and sharp, like a discharged power cell. The smell of violence. He looked, she thought with a thrill of pure horror, half wild. His dark eyes scanned the room not with curiosity, but with a predator's assessment. He was looking for threats. He was looking for an exit. Who are you? Cerelia's voice, though it trembled, carried the authority of her bloodline. It was amplified by the room's acoustics, echoing like a struck chime. Mason's head snapped toward the voice. He saw her. The princess, queen, whatever. She was in charge. He stood up, slowly. He was a good 6 inches taller than her tallest guards, who were now, belatedly, pointing their thin, elegant energy lances at him. "My name is Mason Cross," he said, his voice flat. He pointed a finger at her, a gesture of such profound disrespect the court recoiled. "You pulled me here. Send me back. Now." A tall, thin Virexan in deep blue robes, his face a mask of disgust, glided forward. This was Theron, the High Lore Keeper. "Creature," Theron hissed, "you address the royal hearth, Princess Cerelia of Virexa. You will kneel." Mason almost laughed. "I don't kneel." He took a step toward the dais. The guards tensed. "I said, send me back." "We cannot," Theron said, a sudden confusion rippling his features. He was consulting a small, floating data puck. "The energy signature, it's impossible. It's the beacon." A murmur of shock went through the crowd. The eclipse beacon. It was real. "He is the one," an old noblewoman whispered, her golden eyes wide. "He is the Shadow Blade." Theron looked at Mason with a new, horrified understanding. "Princess, you activated the forbidden relic." Cerelia stood, her spine rigid. "I did what I had to. The contract is invoked. Now, dismiss him. His presence is inappropriate. Send the human back to his primitive world." "I cannot," Theron said, his voice dropping. He looked at Mason, then at his princess, and the full weight of the ancient laws settled on him. "The eclipse beacon forms a permanent bio-contract," Theron announced, his voice shaking. "The protector is bound to the hearth. He cannot be dismissed." "What does that mean?" Cerelia demanded. "Does it mean I'm stuck here?" Mason finished, his eyes narrowing. He was a caged animal. He saw the guards, the glowing lances, the exits. He could take 5 of them, maybe 6 before they put him down. "You are bound, human," Theron said, mistaking his silence for confusion. "You are, by the ancient law, the shield of the princess. You cannot leave her proximity by more than 1,000 body lengths. You cannot, by choice or by force, leave this planet." "Like hell I can't," Mason said. He turned and strode toward the massive crystal doors he had crashed in through. He walked with a predator's fluid grace, a startling contrast to his rough appearance. He reached the threshold. He put one boot over the line, and was snapped back as if by an invisible, giant elastic band. The force was so strong it yanked him off his feet, sending him sprawling onto the crystal floor for the second time. This time, he heard the nobles laugh, a quiet, tittering sound of derision. Mason got to his feet. There was no humor in his eyes, only a quiet, simmering rage that was far more terrifying than any shouting. "The contract is permanent, human," Theron said, enjoying this small victory. "You are her protector, until the day she dies." Or a different voice cut in, smooth and dangerous. "Until the princess herself releases you." It was Lord Valerius, his face a pleasant, smiling mask. He was a peripheral cousin, known for his charm and his utter ruthlessness. "Release me," Mason said, looking at Cerelia. Cerelia looked at the dirty, savage man who was now incomprehensibly tied to her. He was a symbol of her desperation, a walking, breathing, smelling mistake. "I do not know how," she said, her voice cold. "Then you better learn," Mason replied, his voice a low promise. "Because I am not your pet, and I am not your shield. I'm your prisoner, and I'm a very, very bad prisoner." They gave him quarters in the high security wing, the same chambers they used for diplomatic prisoners. It was a cage, for all its opulence. The walls were woven light, the bed a suspended field of soft energy. Mason tore it apart in 5 minutes. He found no cameras, no microphones. The technology was too advanced, probably psionic. He didn't care. He disabled the light-woven door by ripping its power conduit from the wall, shorting it out with a violent blue spark. The guards posted outside, two of the tall, silent types, merely watched. They knew he was trapped on the planet. His little show of rebellion was just that. Little. He sat on the floor in the dark and tried to process aliens, magic tech, a princess. He was in a nightmare. He was in someone else's war. He just wanted to go home. He wanted his cabin, his rifle, and his ghosts. At least his ghosts were familiar. Hours later, the silence of the palace changed. Mason felt it before he heard it. A shift in the air pressure. A change in the harmonic chime of the crystal. It went half a tone flat. His special ops training, buried under years of trauma and whiskey, snapped to the surface. His eyes, fully adjusted to the dark, scanned the room. He was a sensor, and the sensor was screaming. He moved to the disabled door, pressing his back against the wall, and listened. Nothing. That was the problem. The two guards outside were gone. No footsteps, no energy signatures, just gone. He heard a single soft, chirping sound. It came from the direction of the main hall, toward the princess's royal apartments. "Son of a bitch," Mason whispered. He was unarmed. He was in a hostile palace, and the girl he was, by magic or whatever, tied to, was about to be killed, which meant, he realized with a sudden cold clarity, that he might be killed too. Or worse, he might be stuck here, a protector to a corpse. He moved. He didn't run down the main hall. He took the service corridors he had memorized from the brief walk to his room. He moved in the shadows, a ghost in his own right. The palace was dark, the crystal spires absorbing the faint moonlight of Virexa's two moons. He found the guards. They were slumped in a hallway, their throats slit with a precision that was almost beautiful. The edges of the wounds were cauterized, smoking faintly. An energy blade. He grabbed one of the guards' discarded lances. It was light, poorly balanced and humming. He hated it. He threw it down. He rounded the corner to Cerelia's chambers. The massive double doors were slightly ajar, a sliver of golden light spilling out. He heard a whimper. 3 figures, all clad in black, skin-tight stealth suits, were inside. Their forms shimmered, a crude, effective light-bending camouflage. They were cornering Cerelia against a tapestry of her ancestors. One of them held a curved, black blade that hissed. "The general sends his regrets, Your Highness," the lead assassin rasped, his voice a synthesized buzz. "He finds your choice of protector distasteful, and your reign over." The assassin raised its blade. Mason didn't shout. He didn't announce himself. He grabbed the nearest heavy object, a solid crystal statue of Virexa's first queen, and threw it. The statue weighed at least 40 pounds. It crossed the room and shattered against the lead assassin's head with a sound like a small explosion. The assassin dropped, its cloaking field flickering and dying, revealing a face that was a smooth, metallic plate. An android. The other two spun, their reflexes inhumanly fast. They fired energy bolts from their wrists. Mason wasn't there. He was moving, using the room's opulent furniture as cover. He dove behind a chaise lounge as it exploded into superheated plasma. One android advanced on him. The other turned back to the princess. "Finish the job!" Cerelia screamed. The android lunged at her. Mason roared. He kicked the heavy chaise lounge with both feet. It slid across the floor and slammed into the android, pinning it against the wall. The first android was back up, firing wildly. Mason was unarmed, and the android had a wrist-mounted cannon. Bad math. Mason sprinted, not away, but directly at the android. The android aimed for a kill shot. Mason dodged, the bolt searing the air where his head had been. He was inside the android's guard now. He didn't fight with Virexan elegance. He fought like a human, brutal, primal. His first punch shattered the android's optical sensor. His second, an open palm strike to its chest, was a feint. As the android raised its arm to block, Mason dropped, grabbed the android's leg, and wrenched. He was stronger than they had calculated. The android went down. Mason was on it, his hands searching for a weakness. He found the neck joint. He twisted, not to break it. It was reinforced metal. He twisted to gain leverage. He put his boot on the android's shoulder, grabbed its head with both hands, and tore. Metal shrieked. Wires sparked. The android's head came off in his hands. It was messy. It was loud. The second android had just disentangled itself from the chair and was raising its blade to Sirelia, who was huddled on the floor. Mason didn't have time to run. He still held the first android's head. He threw it, hard, like a fastball. It struck the second android in the back. The android staggered, turning. It was all the time Mason needed. He crossed the room in 3 long strides. The android raised its blade. Mason caught its wrist, just as it had caught hers. But his grip wasn't a warning. It was a sentence. He snapped the android's wrist. The blade clattered to the floor. The android's other hand came up, energy weapon charging. Mason drove his thumb into the android's remaining optical sensor, deep into the socket, and scrambled its core processor. The android shuddered, sparked, and went still. The room was silent, save for the hum of dying electronics and Mason's harsh, ragged breathing. Sirelia was staring, her golden eyes wide, her hand over her mouth. The Royal Council, led by Theron and Valerius, burst into the room, alerted by the commotion. A squad of guards, who were, as always, too late, followed them. They stopped. They stared. The princess's chambers were a wreck. The furniture was shattered and the walls were scorched. And in the center of the room, standing over the decapitated, twisted, and broken bodies of 3 advanced model assassins, was the human. He was covered in hydraulic fluid and sparks. He was breathing like a bellows. And he had a look in his eyes that no Virexan had ever seen. A look of pure, satisfied violence. The council was horrified, not by the attempted murder of their princess, but by the sheer, unadulterated brutality of her rescue. There was no elegance, no honor. He had not disabled them. He had destroyed them. He broke them, a noble whispered, clutching her pearls. With his hands. Monstrous, Theron breathed, his face pale. Lord Valerius, however, was not looking at the androids. He was looking at the human, and he was smiling. Mason ignored them all. He looked at Sirelia. The adrenaline was draining, leaving the old familiar hollowness. "You're welcome," he panted. Later, in a shadowed alcove far from the royal chambers, the plotting began. He is an animal," Theron raged, his hands clasped. "He is chaos. He tore them apart. He has polluted the royal chambers with his savagery. The princess must release him." "She cannot," Lord Valerius said, his voice calm. He was studying a small crystalline flower. "And she should not." "Are you insane? He is a primate with blood on his hands." "Yes," Valerius agreed pleasantly. Threx used androids. He did not send Virexans. He did not want to bloody his own hands. He wanted a clean, sterile, political murder. And what did the princess summon? Valerius looked up, his eyes gleaming in the moonlight. "She summoned a man who tears heads off. Threx wants to play a game of elegant strategy. This human just overturned the board and set the pieces on fire." Valerius smiled. "He is chaos. That is exactly what we need." Sirelia did not feel safe. She felt violated, first by the assassins, and now by her savior. He had been given new quarters, closer to hers, a gilded leash. She found him on a balcony overlooking the crystalline city. He had found, from somewhere, a pair of black military-style pants and a simple gray shirt. It made him look less like a lost woodsman and more like a professional soldier. It was not an improvement. He was standing, not admiring the view, but watching the patrol routes. "My counsel is horrified," she said. Her voice was sharp. "Good," Mason said, not turning. "They should be. They're soft. Their guards are slow. You were 10 seconds from being a headline." "You enjoyed it?" she accused, stepping onto the balcony. The air was cool, but she felt hot. "You enjoyed killing them." He turned then, slowly. His dark eyes met hers, and there was no light in them. "Enjoyed it?" "No." He took a step closer. She stood her ground. "I did a job you're apparently too civilized to do for yourselves. They came to kill you. I killed them. That's the math. Or did you want me to try and negotiate with them?" You are a monster," she whispered, the accusation leaving her lips before she could stop it. His face hardened. "That's what they call the man who does the things they're too weak to do themselves. That's what they always call him. You are a savage, a brute, a primitive animal," she said, her voice rising, her control snapping. "You do not belong here. You are a mistake." She punctuated the last word by striking him. It was not a shove. It was a full, open-handed slap, her rings and alien strength connecting with his human jaw. The sound was sharp, like a gunshot, echoing in the crystal silence. Mason did not flinch. He did not move. He just stopped. The air on the balcony froze. The hum of the city faded. Slowly, he raised his head. A small trickle of blood, blue-golden from her ring, ran from his lip. He licked it, his eyes never leaving hers. She raised her hand to strike him again, her fury and fear of a boiling pot. He caught her wrist. His grip was not violent. It was not a blow. It was simply absolute. His large, calloused, human hand wrapped around her delicate, slender wrist. His strength was effortless, instantly negating her own. Time stopped. She was trapped. He hadn't hurt her, but he could. The power radiated off him, a dark, contained heat. She could feel the calluses on his thumb as it rested against the delicate, pulsing skin of her inner wrist. Her anger vanished, replaced by a sudden, terrifying, and completely alien sensation. It was a jolt, a current that ran from the point of contact straight to her core. It was power. It was a desire. His eyes were locked on hers. They were not the eyes of a monster. They were the eyes of a man who had seen the abyss and had just been slapped back toward it. He had not let go. She had not pulled away. The grand hall of the Ethel Palace was designed to intimidate. The ceiling was a holographic projection of the Andarix galaxy, swirling in real time, a reminder that the Virexan influence stretched across stars. Today, however, the galaxy seemed to hold its breath. Princess Cerelia stood at the precipice of the obsidian dais. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of light-woven silk. Below her, the nobility of Virexa Prime had gathered, thousands of them. They were a sea of shimmering robes and whispered judgments. They were looking at him. Mason Cross stood one step below her and to the right. He had refused the ceremonial robes. Instead, he wore a fitted black tactical tunic the royal tailors had constructed overnight, terrified by his threats. It was utilitarian, devoid of jewels, and emphasized the terrifying width of his shoulders. He looked like a shadow cast by a monolith. The murmurs were getting louder. The scandal of the android assassins was already eclipsed by the scandal of the human. A primitive, a brute. Cerelia raised her hand. The hall fell silent. "People of Virexa," her voice rang out, amplified by the crystal acoustics. "The galaxy is changing. Shadows lengthen at our borders, and in times of shadow, we do not seek the light of the scholar. We seek the steel of the warrior. She felt Mason shift beside her. He hated this. She could feel his discomfort radiating off him like heat. The ancient beacon was lit, she continued, her voice steadying. And it was answered. By the laws of the first hearth, I present to you my sworn protector. She turned to him. He looked at her, his face impassive, his dark eyes unreadable. I name him Shadowblade, she declared. A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. Shadowblade. It was a title from the myths of the Unification Wars. A title reserved for a destroyer of worlds. To give it to a human was blasphemy. To give it to this human was a declaration of war against tradition. Lord Valerius, standing in the front row, inclined his head. A small, knowing smile played on his lips. He understood. She was not apologizing for the monster. She was weaponizing him. Mason stepped forward. He did not bow. He scanned the crowd, his gaze lingering on the ambassadors from the trade guilds and the military attachés. He was marking targets. I am the Shadowblade, Mason said. His voice was not amplified, yet it carried to the back of the hall, rough and undeniable. And I am the only thing standing between your princess and the grave. Anyone who has a problem with that can come speak to me directly. He let the silence hang there, heavy and threatening. The meeting was adjourned, he said. The uproar was immediate, but Mason turned his back on them, ushering Cerelia off the stage with a hand hovering near, but not touching, the small of her back. That went well, he grunted as the heavy doors sealed behind them. You threatened the entire aristocracy, Cerelia said, her legs feeling weak now that the performance was over. I established boundaries, Mason corrected. Now tell me about this cousin of yours. The war room was a stark contrast to the throne room. It was a sphere of floating data streams. Mason paced the perimeter, reading the tactical displays with a speed that surprised Theron, who hovered nervously by the controls. General Threx, Mason said, pointing to a holographic projection of a severe-looking Virexan male with a cybernetic eye. He controls the Third Fleet and the border garrisons, Cerelia added. She sat at the central table, watching Mason work. He was different when he was analyzing a threat. The brute force receded, replaced by a cold, terrifying intelligence. He claims he wants to strengthen the Empire. He wants a throne, Mason said. And he's outsourcing. The assassins were androids, high-end. That means money. Who is funding him? We do not know, Theron admitted. The financial trails are encrypted. Nothing is encrypted if you break the right fingers, Mason muttered. Over the next week, the court learned exactly what Mason meant. The investigation led to Ambassador Kalen, a representative of the mining guild. Kalen was a slippery man who smiled with too many teeth. He had been avoiding Cerelia's inquiries for months. Mason found him in the translucent dining atrium, surrounded by sycophants. Mason didn't ask for a private audience. He walked up to Kalen's table, picked up the ambassador's wine glass, drank it, and set it down hard enough to crack the stem. We need to talk, Mason said. I have nothing to say to a primitive, Kalen sneered, though his eyes darted to his guards. Mason grabbed the ambassador by the collar of his expensive robe and hauled him out of his chair. The guards moved. Mason didn't even look at them. He drew a heavy kinetic pistol he had liberated from the armory and placed it on the table. Sit down, he told the guards. They sat. He turned back to Kalen. You're moving funds to Threx. I saw the transport logs. Don't lie to me. I speak liars fluently. You cannot prove. Mason leaned in. He didn't shout. He dropped his voice to a whisper that only Kalen and Cerelia, watching from the balcony, could hear. I don't need proof, Ambassador. I'm not a judge. I'm the guy they send when the judge is dead. Tell me where the weapons are coming from, or I will dismantle your life piece by piece, starting with your knees." Kalen went pale. He whispered a set of coordinates. 2 days later, at a diplomatic gala, Mason identified a spy. She was a beautiful Lyrian shapeshifter, posing as a visiting duchess. She had been asking too many questions about the palace defenses. Instead of arresting her, Mason intercepted her on the terrace. Sirelia watched from behind a curtain, her stomach twisting in a knot she refused to identify as jealousy. She saw Mason lean against the balustrade, a drink in his hand. The spy moved in, touching his arm, her laugh tinkering like glass bells. Mason smiled. It was a wolfish, charming smile that Sirelia had never seen. He leaned down, whispering something in the spy's ear. The spy shivered, her hand trailing down his chest. Sirelia felt a hot flush of anger. He was flirting. He was enjoying this. Then, Mason stepped back, his expression instantly flat. The spy looked terrified. She hurried away, straight into the waiting arms of the royal guard. Mason looked up at the balcony, straight at Sirelia's hiding spot. "She gave up the encryption codes," he said, his voice carrying on the wind. "Stop spying on me, princess." But she couldn't stop. She found herself drawn to the training grounds in the early hours of the cycle. Mason refused to use the holographic combat simulators. He claimed they lacked weight. Instead, he had dragged huge stones from the garden into the center of the arena. Sirelia watched from the shadows of the archway. Mason was shirtless. His skin was tanned, a stark contrast to the pale violet of her people. He was lifting a stone that must have weighed 300 pounds, pressing it overhead with a grunt of exertion. Sweat slicked his muscles, making them gleam in the dawn light. He was a landscape of kinetic potential. Every movement was deliberate. He didn't move like a dancer. He moved like a piston. She saw the scars then, not clearly, just flashes of white tissue against the tan skin, a long slash across his ribs, a starburst on his shoulder. He lowered the stone and stood there, chest heaving. He looked up at the sky, and for a moment, the mask of the soldier slipped. Sirelia saw a profound, aching loneliness that stole the breath from her lungs. That night, she dreamed of him, not as a guard. She dreamed of his hands, rough and hot, on her skin. She dreamed of his weight. She woke up gasping, her body alive with a shameful, electric heat. The coordinates Kalen gave us point to a moon in the Nebulan sector, Mason said the next morning. He was back in his tactical tunic, the vulnerability of the training ground gone. "It's a dead drop. Weapons cache." "I will authorize a strike team," Sirelia said, refusing to meet his eyes. "No," Mason said, "and if Threx has spies in the council, a strike team is just a delivery service for target practice. We go alone." "I cannot leave the capital." "You have to. The bond," Mason reminded her, tapping his chest. "I can't go more than 1,000 lengths from you, and if I go to the moon, you go to the moon. Besides, you need air." They took a small, unmarked courier ship. Mason flew. He handled the advanced Virexan controls with annoying competence, his hands flying over the haptic interface. "You learn fast," she noted. "It's just a machine," he shrugged. "Thrust, vector, fuel, it's all the same math." The Nebulan moon was a jagged rock of ice and sulfur. As they descended toward the coordinates, the ship's sensors screamed. "Lock on!" Mason yelled. "Hold on to something!" A surface-to-air missile, concealed in the ice, slammed into their starboard engine. The ship lurched violently. Alarms blared. The world spun into a kaleidoscope of warning lights and spinning horizons. "We're going down!" Mason roared. He struggled with the controls, fighting to keep the nose up. "Brace!" They hit the ice hard. Metal screamed. The ship skidded, tearing a furrow through the frozen landscape. before plunging into a deep, subterranean crevasse. Darkness swallowed them. When Cerelia woke, the silence was heavy. The emergency lighting bathed the cockpit in a pulsing red glow. "Mason," she whispered. "I'm here." His voice was strained. He was leaning over her, checking her harness. Blood trickled from a cut on his forehead. "You hurt?" I do not think so." Good. We need to move. The reactor is leaking. This thing is going to cook us in about 10 minutes. He popped the hatch. Cold, biting air rushed in. They climbed out, dropping onto the rock floor of a massive underground cavern. Above them, the crevasse was a jagged slit of distant light. They were miles underground. "The atmosphere is breathable," Mason said, checking his wrist comp. "But it's freezing and we need to find heat." They walked for an hour through the dark, guided only by Mason's tactical light. The temperature was dropping rapidly. Cerelia's environmental suit was torn at the leg, and the cold was seeping in, numbing her limbs. "There," Mason pointed. Ahead, a pool of water steamed in the darkness. It was a thermal vent, fed by the moon's volcanic core. The air around it was thick and humid. Cerelia stumbled. Mason caught her. His hands were warm through her suit. "You're hypothermic," he said roughly. "We have to get in the water." "And my suit is useless. It's compromised. If you keep it on, the wet fabric will freeze to your skin and kill you. Take it off." He didn't wait for an argument. He began stripping off his own gear, his tactical vest, his shirt, his boots. Cerelia hesitated, shivering violently. But the cold was a physical weight. She fumbled with the seals. She stepped into the water. It was hot, shockingly so, stinging her frozen skin. She sank to her shoulders, the heat seeping into her bones. Mason slid in opposite her. The red light from his dropped tactical lamp cast long, dancing shadows on the cave walls. And now she saw them clearly. Mason was naked from the waist up. His body was a tapestry of violence. The scars she had seen from a distance were horrifying up close. A jagged, knotted mass of tissue covered his left pectoral. Burn marks scarred his flank. His back was a map of lash marks and shrapnel wounds. Cerelia stared. In her culture, bodies were flawless. Scars were healed instantly by medical light weavers. To carry such marks was unheard of. "Stop staring," Mason said, his voice low. He splashed water over his face, washing away the blood. "Who did this to you?" she whispered. "Everyone," he said. "The enemy. My government. Life." He leaned back against the rock, closing his eyes. "The big one on the chest? IED? Improvised explosive? The one on the shoulder? Bullet? The burns?" "That was a village in the Sumter Valley." His voice cracked on the name. "You mentioned that before," Cerelia said softly. She waded closer to him. The water swirled around her, buoyant and warm. "War crimes." Mason opened his eyes. They were dark pools of pain. "I was ordered to clear a sector. They said it was a staging ground for insurgents. It wasn't. It was a school. I called in the strike. I watched it burn." He looked at his hands, submerged in the dark water. "I tried to pull them out. The fire was too hot. That's where the burns on my back came from. I failed. I killed them, and I failed to save them. That is why you live in the woods," she realized. "That is why you want to be alone." "I'm poison, princess," he rasped. "I destroy everything I touch, and that's why you need to figure out how to break this contract. Before I destroy you too." Cerelia looked at the man before her. She saw the monster the court feared, but she also saw the man who had tried to walk into a fire to save children. She moved before she thought. She closed the distance between them. She reached out and placed her hand on the scar tissue of his shoulder. The skin was rough, raised and hard. Mason flinched as if she had burned him. "Don't!" "It is not poison," she whispered. It is proof. You survived. She traced the line of the scar down his chest, her fingertips light. Mason's breath hitched. He stared at her, his pupils dilating. "Sirelia," he warned, his voice a rumble in his chest. "I am not afraid of you, Mason Cross." She moved her hand to his neck, her thumb brushing the pulse point. It was hammering. He broke. He reached out and grabbed her waist. His hands were large, encompassing her, pulling her through the water until her body collided with his. The contact was electric, skin on skin, heat on heat. He lowered his head and kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss, it was desperate. It tasted of survival and fear and pent-up rage. He devoured her, his mouth moving over hers with a starving intensity. Sirelia gasped, opening to him, wrapping her arms around his neck, tangling her fingers in his wet hair. He groaned, a low, guttural sound, and pulled her tighter. She could feel every hard plane of his body against hers. The desire was a physical pain, sharp and exquisite. For a moment, there was no galaxy, no war, no crown. There was just the heat of the water and the taste of him. Then Mason pulled back. He was breathing hard, his forehead resting against hers. His hands were still gripping her waist, his thumbs digging into her hips. "We can't," he whispered, his voice wrecked. "Why?" she breathed, her lips swollen. "Because if I start," he said, looking deep into her eyes, "I won't be able to stop. And you're a queen. And I'm just the hired gun." "You are more than that," she said fiercely. "Not yet," he said. He released her slowly, painfully. "Not yet." He moved to the edge of the pool, putting distance between them. "Get warmed up. The emergency beacon on the ship is automated. They'll find us soon." The rescue came 3 hours later. A royal extraction team hauled them out of the crevasse. The flight back to the capital was silent, but the air between them had changed. It was charged, heavy with the memory of the water and the kiss. Mason sat in the co-pilot seat, staring out at the stars. Sirelia watched his reflection in the glass. They had found the weapons cache coordinates in the ship's nav computer before it died. The mission was a success, but something else had happened in that cave. A line had been crossed. When they returned to the Ethel Palace, the mood had changed. The rumors had mutated. The court was buzzing not just with fear of the Shadow Blade, but with something more salacious. The servants whispered about how the princess had returned with her hair wild and her protector looking at her as if he wanted to eat her alive. Sirelia walked into her council chamber to find Theron and Valerius waiting. They looked grave. "Your Highness," Theron began, wringing his hands, "we are glad of your safe return. But the optics, the galaxy is watching. Rumors of your proximity to the human are damaging your standing." "They say you have been bewitched by a barbarian," Valerius added, though his tone suggested he found the idea amusing. "The stability of the throne relies on your purity, your availability." "My availability?" Sirelia asked dangerously. "The Grand Courtship Festival," Theron announced. "It has been moved forward. The Council has decreed it. Delegations from the 12 systems are already en route. You must choose a consort, a proper consort." "I did not agree to this," Sirelia snapped. "It is not a request, Majesty," Theron said, finding a backbone she didn't know he had. "It is a necessity, to silence the rumors, to prove that the human is just a tool and not something else." Mason was standing by the door, his arms crossed. He listened to the words, consort, proper tool. He looked at Sirelia. She looked back, her eyes pleading. "Fine," Sirelia said, her voice icy. "Let them come. I will attend your festival." "And the Shadow Blade?" Theron asked nervously. "Perhaps he should remain in—" "He will attend," Sirelia cut him off. He is my protector, and where I go, he goes. Theron swallowed. Very well. Later, Mason walked her to her chambers. At the door, he stopped. Are you going to pick one of them? He asked. One of the proper consorts? Cerelia looked up at him. She wanted to reach out and touch the scar on his neck. She wanted to drag him into her room and finish what they started in the cave. I do not know, she said softly. They are telling me I have to save my kingdom. Maybe, Mason said, leaning close, his voice a low rumble that made her knees weak. But don't forget what you told me in the cave, about not being afraid. I am not afraid of you, she whispered. Good, Mason said, because if any of those shiny princes tries to touch you tomorrow night, I'm going to break their fingers. He turned and walked away down the corridor, leaving her standing alone, heart pounding, waiting for the music to begin. The grand gardens of Ethel were designed to be a triumph of sterile perfection. Under the silver-blue light of the twin moons, Iridia and Nyx, the genetically engineered flowers opened their petals, releasing a soft, harmonic chime. The air was thick with the scent of starlight jasmine and the murmur of polite, predatory conversation. This was the grand courtship festival, and it was a lie. It was a trade negotiation disguised as a mating ritual, a political battlefield where alliances were sealed with smiles and whispers. And tonight, Cerelia was the prize. She made her entrance, the music, a delicate plinking string arrangement, faltered. The conversations died. The council had demanded she wear the ceremonial robes of a biddable princess. She had chosen instead the attire of a queen who was not bidding. Her dress was a scandal. It was not woven light or heavy silk. It was a minimalist sculpture of black, living crystal that clung to her torso and hips, leaving her arms, back, and legs bare. The fabric, if one could call it that, seemed to drink the moonlight, leaving her skin to provide the illumination. And it did. Her naturally bioluminescent skin, a trait of her bloodline, was pulsing with a soft, golden light, a defiant contrast to the black dress. Her golden, pupilless eyes scanned the crowd, missing nothing. And for the first time in public, she had not bound her tail. It was long, slender, and covered in fine, silken, golden fur, swaying gently behind her, a declaration of her non-human lineage and a clear sign of her irritation. She was, in every way, a vision of alien regality, and she was terrifying. Mason stood in the shadows of a great willow-like tree, his black tactical uniform absorbing all light. He was a singularity of menace in a field of shimmering pastels. He watched the suitors. There was a prince from the Hydrus sector, all puffed up arrogance and glittering water jewels. There was a Xylos knight, encased in white and gold armor, looking more like a statue than a man. And there were dozens more, all preening, all posturing, all looking at Cerelia like a piece of property. He hated it. He hated them. The cave, the heat of the water, the desperate, unfinished kiss. It was a raw nerve, and this entire festival was salt being rubbed directly into it. He was supposed to be a professional, a guard, a tool. But watching them look at her, he felt a primal, possessive rage that was anything but professional. He stayed aloof, his arms crossed, his face a mask of stone, but his eyes never left her. A noble Lord Arian of the third house, a man known for his charm and his assumption that the word no did not apply to him, decided to be bold. He was handsome in the flawless, sculpted Virexan way, and he saw Mason as nothing more than a brutish pet. Arian cornered Cerelia near the fountains. Your Highness, he purred, his voice a slick baritone. You are radiant. The rumors of your distraction were clearly exaggerated. Were they Lord Arian? Cerelia's voice was ice. Of course, he smiled, stepping into her personal space. A creature like that, he gestured dismissively toward Mason, is a tool, a novelty. It is not a companion for a queen. He reached out and stroked her bare arm. Sirelia flinched but held her ground. On the other hand, Arian continued, misreading her stillness for acceptance. Understand what a queen truly needs. He reached, not for her hand, but for her tail. He was fast, his fingers closing on the delicate silken fur, a gesture of profound, unthinkable violation. The music stopped. Sirelia's breath caught in a gasp of pure shock. Mason was no longer in the shadows. He did not rush. He did not shout. He moved with the silent, fluid lethality that had become his hallmark. He covered the 20 feet in 2 seconds. Arian was still smiling, his hand still on her tail. When Mason arrived, Mason's left hand shot out and clamped onto Arian's wrist. His right hand came up, grasping the noble's elbow. "You do not," Mason's voice was a low, dead whisper, "touch her." Arian's eyes widened, his arrogance finally giving way to fear. "Unhand me, primitive. Do you know who I—" Mason twisted. It was a simple, practiced biomechanical motion. He used Arian's own resistance against him, rotating the elbow against the joint's natural lock. There was a sound, a wet, tearing snap. It was not loud, but in the sudden absolute silence of the garden, it sounded like a tree breaking. Lord Arian screamed, but it was a high, thin, reedy sound, utterly undignified. He collapsed, clutching his arm, which now bent at a sickening, impossible angle. Mason stepped back, wiping his hand on his tunic. He looked at the screaming noble on the ground with the mild disinterest of a man who had just squashed a bug. He then looked up at the rest of the suitors. "Anyone else?" he asked. The entire garden recoiled as one. The Xylos knight took an unconscious step backward. The Prince of Hydrus went pale. Guards rushed forward, their useless lances raised. Sirelia simply raised her hand. "Stop!" She looked down at the whimpering Lord Arian. She looked at the terrified faces of her would-be consorts. Then she looked at Mason. He was a pillar of black rage, a monster who had just protected her. A slow smile, cold and brilliant, spread across her face. "Take Lord Arian to the healers," she commanded. His enthusiasm soon overcame his judgment. She turned back to the crowd, her golden eyes blazing. "The festival will continue." The music, after a long, awkward pause, began again. But the mood was broken. The suitors kept their distance, huddling in small, nervous groups. Sirelia walked to the center of the grand terrace, a wide, empty expanse of polished moonstone. The music was still the same polite, tinkling drivel. "No," she said aloud. She walked to the musicians. "Play the old music. Play the hymn of the first hearth, the one with the drums." The musicians looked at each other in terror. It was a ceremonial war chant, a primal pounding rhythm that had not been played in public for 1,000 years. It was considered barbaric. "Play it," she commanded. The timid strings faded, and a moment later, a deep, slow, pounding drumbeat began. It vibrated through the moonstone floor, thrumming in the pit of the stomach. Sirelia smiled. She closed her eyes, and she danced. It was not the elegant, gliding dance of the Virexan court. She moved to the drum, her body swaying, her hips rolling. She let the music possess her. Her tail was not an ornament, it was a counterbalance, a flowing river of gold as she spun. She was all alien grace, all primal fire. She was challenging the court, challenging her ancestors, challenging the entire galaxy. And then, she opened her eyes and looked directly at Mason. It was not an invitation, it was a command. Mason stood frozen. He was a soldier. He was a brute. He did not dance. This was political suicide. He was proving Threx's every accusation. He was the savage, and he was corrupting the princess. He should walk away. He should fade back into the shadows. But the drum was pounding in his blood, and she was watching him, her golden eyes lit with a fire that matched his own. She was not afraid of him. She was like him. He walked onto the terrace. A collective gasp went up. He was the shadow, and she was the light. He was the void, and she was the star. He stopped 3 feet from her. He did not know the steps. He did not care. She moved. He mirrored her. The dance was a battle. It was a seduction. When she spun, he moved to block her, his body a solid wall. She did not retreat. She flowed around him, her hands brushing his chest, sending sparks through his uniform. He caught her, his hands on her waist, and lifted her. She felt weightless. They were not dancing. They were burning. The court watched, horrified, mesmerized. This was not a princess and her guard. This was a man and a woman. This was raw. This was real. This was a primal claim being made in front of the entire aristocracy. They were breaking every rule, and they were doing it with a grace that was, in its own way, more terrifying than the breaking of Arian's arm. The drum reached its crescendo and stopped. Mason and Cerelia stood in the center of the terrace, chests heaving. His hands were on her waist. Her hands were on his shoulders. They were breathing each other's air. Mason did not care about the court. He did not care about the princes or the politicians. He looked at her, and he saw the woman from the cave, the woman who had touched his scars and not recoiled. "Cerelia," he whispered, his voice rough. "I know," she breathed. She took his hand and, without looking at the stunned and silent crowd, she walked off the terrace and pulled him into the palace. The walk to her chambers was silent, the tension a physical thing, a third person walking beside them. At her door, the 2 royal guards snapped to attention. "You leave us," Cerelia said. "Majesty," one guard protested. The shadow blade is with me. Leave, now." The guards retreated, their disapproval a palpable force. Mason followed her into her chambers. He stood in the middle of the room, his fists clenched, a caged animal. "That was a mistake," he said, his voice a low growl. "Was it?" she asked. She was unfastening the black crystal dress. It fell to the floor with a sound like sighing sand, leaving her in a simple, thin silk slip. "You just destroyed your political alliances," he said, his back to her. He was staring out the window at the moons. "You made a fool of every suitor. You proved Threx right. You are compromised." "Am I?" she asked, and she walked toward him. "This," he said, gesturing between them, "is a disaster. I'm your guard. I'm not this." "What are you, Mason?" she whispered, coming to stand behind him. She could feel the heat rolling off his back. "I'm the man who breaks things. I broke Arian's arm. I broke your party. I'm going to break your kingdom." "I am not afraid," she said. He spun around. His eyes were burning, full of self-loathing and a desire that was so strong it was almost hatred. "You should be. You have no idea what you are inviting into your life, into your bed." She reached up and touched his face. She traced the faint scar on his lip from her own ring. "I have some ideas. You are a man who has seen the worst the universe has to offer, and you are still standing. I am a killer. You are a protector. I am poison," he whispered, the words a raw wound. "Then I am poisoned," she whispered back, "because I am not afraid of you." That was the key, the words that unlocked the last of his control. He grabbed her. His mouth crashed down on hers, not a kiss but a collision. It was furious. It was desperate. It was the end of all pretense. He hauled her up against him, his hands tangling in her hair. She wrapped her legs around his waist, her own desperation matching his. He kicked the door to her sleeping chambers open and carried her inside. Never breaking the kiss, they fell onto the bed, a tangle of limbs. This was not the gentle seduction of a romance novel. This was a bonfire. He tore at her slip. She clawed at his tunic, needing to feel his skin, his scars. This was the aching desire from the cave, unleashed and unchecked. He was a force of nature, all hard muscles and rough hands. She met him with a free society that shocked them both. She was not a fragile princess. She was a queen claiming her territory. "Mason," she gasped, her nails digging into his scarred back. "I'm going to break you," he groaned, his voice wrecked, his lips at her throat. "Then break me," she dared, pulling his face back to hers. Their lovemaking was a storm, furious and passionate, a release of weeks of tension, fear, and a loneliness neither of them knew how to name. It whispered promises in a language of touch and teeth. It was the sound of two broken things finding a way to fit together, however jagged their edges. Afterward, they lay in the wreckage of the sheets on slick with sweat, the two moons painting their bodies in silver and blue light. He was propped on an elbow, looking down at her. He traced the golden markings on her cheek with a calloused finger. "You cry for help," he said, his voice heavy with a terrible new vulnerability. "But you have no idea what kind of man answered." Sirelia looked up at him, her golden eyes clear and unafraid. She put her hand over his, pressing his rough palm to her face. "I don't care," she said, her voice full of a certainty that staggered him. "I chose you now." The comm unit on her nightstand beeped, a harsh, invasive sound. "Ignore it," Mason growled, moving to kiss her again. "I cannot," she sighed, the spell breaking. She tapped the crystal. "What is it?" It was Theron, his holographic image appearing above the unit. His face was gray with panic. "Your Highness," he stammered. "A message. From the border. From General Threx." A new hologram replaced Theron's. It was Threx. He was in the command center of his flagship, his cybernetic eye glowing red. "A princess," his voice boomed, cold and full of false regret. "Your actions have forced my hand. The attack on the outpost at Cygnus was a success." "Attack!" Sirelia sat bolt upright, pulling the sheet over her. "A necessary correction," Threx said. "You have been compromised. The court, the council, the entire system. They see it. You have allowed an unclean alien influence to cloud your judgment." The hologram shifted to show footage of the festival, of Mason breaking Arian's arm, of their dance. It was grainy, shot from a distance, but unmistakable. "You have been mentally compromised by alien influence," Threx declared, his voice broadcasting not just to her, but she realized with horror, to the entire system. "You are unfit to rule. I am assuming emergency command of the Virexan military. For the good of the Empire." The transmission cut. "He used us," Mason said, his voice a low, lethal vibration. He was already out of bed, pulling on his pants. The festival was a trap. He knew I'd act. Before Sirelia could answer, the comm unit chimed again, a different seal, a cold, ominous, silver triangle. "The Intergalactic Tribunal," Theron's voice returned, shaking. "Majesty, they are summoning you, now." The air in the room went from hot and intimate to arctic cold. A new hologram flickered to life. It was not a person. It was a tall, crystalline entity with too many arms and a voice like fracturing ice. It was a proctor of the tribunal, Princess Sirelia of Virexa Prime. The entity droned, its voice devoid of all emotion. "You have been charged. You are in violation of Treaty Statute 314 Alpha, endangerment of a sector by the harboring of a Level 4 hazardous primitive." Level 4 hazardous, Sirelia began. "The human Mason Cross," the proctor said. "You have consorted with it. You have destabilized your government. You have provoked a civil war. This is unacceptable." "You have no jurisdiction," Mason started. We have all jurisdiction. The proctor cut him off, its non-face turning toward him. You are the problem. Human. The tribunal offers one solution. Surrender the human, Mason Cross, to our custody for sanitation. Sanitation? Cerelia whispered, her blood running cold. Or, the proctor continued, your title, your bloodline, and your world standing in the galactic concordate are forfeit. Virexa Prime will be isolated, embargoed, and left to its own primitive fate. Choose, princess. Mason looked at Cerelia. He saw the trap, her crown, her people, or him. He had been right. He was poisonous. He was the man who broke everything. He opened his mouth to tell her to do it, to save her world. No, Cerelia said. Her voice was quiet, but it was not the voice of a princess. It was the voice of a queen. It was the voice of the woman from the bed. No, the proctor asked, as if the word was a foreign concept. I will not surrender him. The proctor was silent for a long, cold moment. So be it. The hologram vanished. An instant later, alarms blared across the entire palace. Not the fire alarm, the defense alarm. Theron's face reappeared, his features a mask of pure terror. Majesty, what did you do? A bounty, a system-wide bounty. It's just been posted on every network. From the tribunal, 4 systems, 10 million credits for the human, dead or alive. Mason finished buckling his boots and stood. He pulled his pistol from the holster on the nightstand, where he had left it, and checked the charge. He looked at Cerelia. She was not a frightened girl. She was a warrior. She was standing by the bed, the sheet wrapped around her, her eyes blazing. You should have given me up, he said softly. I chose you, remember? She said, her voice shaking but full of steel. Yeah, Mason said, a grim, dangerous smile touching his lips for the first time. You did. The door to her chambers exploded inward, and the first of the bounty hunters, a team of 6-legged Xylos mercenaries, swarmed in, their weapons hot. The Xylos mercenaries swarmed in, 6-legged engines of chrome and malice, their weapons screaming as they discharged bolts of plasma. Get behind me, Mason roared, shoving Cerelia toward the bed. He kicked a heavy table over, creating a makeshift barricade. A bolt of energy vaporized the spot where she had been standing. The balcony, he yelled, firing his pistol. The kinetic slugs were primitive, but they were devastating to Virexan-shielded targets. The first mercenary's head exploded in a shower of sparks and wiring. Cerelia scrambled, the sheet still clutched to her chest. She was a queen, but she was also a target. Mason was a dervish of a brutal economy. He didn't waste motion. He fired twice, dropping another Xylos, then grabbed the third by one of its spindly legs, using its body as a shield. The other mercenaries hesitated, not wanting to hit their comrade. It was the half-second Mason needed. He drew the heavy-gauge kinetic shotgun he had stashed under her bed, a precaution that Theron had called barbaric, and fired. The blast was deafening in the crystal room, a concussive roar that shattered windows. It tore through the mercenary he was holding and the 2 behind it, painting the far wall in a grotesque spray of metal and hydraulic fluid. Move, he yelled. He grabbed her hand, ignoring the sheet, and pulled her onto the balcony. The city was screaming with alarms. Ships were already lifting off from the tribunal embassy, bounty hunters eager for the 10 million credit prize. Where are we going? She cried, the wind whipping her hair. Down. He didn't take the stairs. He hauled her over the railing and, gripping her waist, used the ornamental crystal latticework as a crude ladder. They descended 10 stories in as many seconds. His boots and hands finding purchase in the ancient architecture, they landed in a service corridor, unseen. The royal hangar is a kill box, he panted, pulling her into the darkness of the service tunnels. Every hunter in the system will be there. We will go to the diplomatic stables. They ran for what felt like hours, through dark, forgotten tunnels beneath the glittering crystal city. This was his world now. The shadows, the grime, the smell of ozone and fear. He was the king of this dark, practical underworld. He disabled 2 guards with silent, non-lethal precision. He didn't have time to kill them, and they emerged in a hangar reserved for ambassadorial shuttles. It was empty, save for one. A sleek, black courier ship with the seal of the Hydrus sector, the one whose prince had watched the festival in fear. "That'll do," Mason said. He bypassed the lock by ripping the panel off the wall and cross-wiring the ignition. It was loud. It was crude. "Get in the co-pilot seat and strap in," he ordered. Sirelia did, her hands shaking. She was still, she realized with a strange, distant horror, mostly naked, clutching a bedsheet. The hangar doors were sealed. "Hold on," Mason said. He didn't try to open the doors. He firewalled the engines and aimed the ship's nose-mounted laser cannons at the hinges. The cannons were designed for disabling pirates, not for heavy demolition. It took 3 agonizing, screaming blasts before the door buckled. "Sloppy," he grunted and then punched the throttle. They rocketed out of the hangar, straight into the chaotic sky of Virexa Prime. A dozen ships immediately swarmed their position, their comms lighting up with demands to surrender. "They're hailing us," Sirelia shouted over the alarms. "They can hail this," Mason snarled. He jammed the throttle forward, sending the small ship screaming toward the atmosphere. He pushed the navigation into a series of random, chaotic hyperspace jumps, a tactic designed to fry a ship's engines but also to scramble any attempt at a tracking lock. They jumped, again and again, the universe folding and unfolding outside the cockpit in dizzying, nauseating flashes of blue and white. Finally, after the 6th jump, the ship shuddered violently and the alarms went from frantic to mournful. "Engines are cooked," Mason said, his voice flat. They were floating dead in an uncharted black expanse. "We are lost," Sirelia whispered. "No," Mason said. He was already working on a secondary console, a black market device he had plugged into the dash. "We're just hard to find. I know this sector. There's a refueling depot 3 light hours from here on chemical thrusters. We just have to be quiet." For 2 weeks they ran. They ditched the courier ship at the depot, trading it to a one-eyed, 4-armed mechanic for a freighter that smelled of uncured meat. They slept in rotating shifts in the cold, metal-floored cockpit. Sirelia learned to navigate by reading old paper star charts, as their electronic navigation was a beacon for bounty hunters. Mason's underground contacts were a network of broken, dangerous people. A smuggler on a hollowed-out asteroid, a disgraced data broker in the slums of a ring station. For the first time, Sirelia saw the galaxy not as a map of her kingdom, but as a dirty, sprawling, interconnected web of survival and greed. "Where are we going?" she finally asked, after they had traded the freighter for a 3rd, smaller ship, a rust bucket with a hyperdrive that knocked. "A place where the Tribunal and Threx have no pull," Mason said, his eyes on the navigation screen. "A neutral system. Cathar. I have never heard of it." "Good," Mason said. "That's why we're going. I know a guy there, an old friend. His name is Rook." Cathar was not a planet. It was a jungle, a single sprawling planet-wide jungle, choked with vegetation that was hostile and intelligent. The only city was a floating platform of rust and repurposed starship hulls called the Perch. It was a haven for criminals, mercenaries, and those who had nowhere else to go. The air smelled of mildew, cheap fuel, and something sweet that was probably poisonous. Mason landed their ship on a pylon that looked moments from collapsing. A tall, impossibly thin man in a worn duster coat was waiting, leaning against a crate and chewing on a piece of wire. "Cross," the man said, his voice a dry rasp. "You look like hell, and you're late." "Rook," Mason said. He stepped off the ramp and the two men embraced, not in a hug, but in a hard, violent clap on the back. Rook's eyes, pale and cybernetic, swiveled to Cerelia, who was huddled in a borrowed flight jacket, her golden eyes wide, her tail wrapped tightly around her waist for comfort. "And you brought a pet," Rook rasped, a half-smile playing on his scarred lips. "A pretty one. Expensive." "She's not a pet, Rook," Mason said, his voice low and dangerous. "She's the client. She's complicated." "A complicated is what gets you killed, Mason," Rook said. "And you have a 10 million credit bounty on your head. That's kind of complicated. I don't need it. I need a safe house, and I need intel. Everything you have on a man named Threx and a group called the Consortium of Silence." Rook's cybernetic eye whirred, focusing on Mason. "Consortium? You're not just complicated, you're suicidal. Get inside. My price just went up." The safe house was a single room at the back of a bar called the Gutter. The bar was a loud, wet, dangerous place filled with the dregs of the galaxy. The room had one bed, one flickering light, and a window that looked out onto a solid wall of fungal-covered pipes. "It's homey," Cerelia said, her voice small. "It's safe," Mason corrected. He tossed her a small, sealed packet. "Food." She opened it. It was a gray, nutrient paste. She looked at him, her royal stomach turning. "Eat," he said. He was already by the door, listening. She tried. She squeezed the paste into her mouth and gagged. It tasted like ash and salt. "I cannot," she whispered. "You have to," Mason said, his voice hard. "Your palace is gone. Your cooks are gone, and your crown is gone. Out here, you are not a princess. You are just meat. And if you're too weak to eat, you're too weak to survive. So you eat, or you die." His words were brutal, unfair, and honest. She looked at the gray paste. She thought of her banquet halls, of the delicate, light-infused fruits she used to eat. Then she thought of the Xylo's mercenaries and the long, cold nights in the freighter. She put the paste in her mouth and swallowed it. She ate all of it. Good," Mason said, his expression softening, just a fraction. They lived like that for 3 days. Mason and Rook would leave for hours hunting for intel, leaving her locked in the room. She was alone, stripped of all status, all comfort. On the 4th day, Mason had to meet a contact. He left her in the main bar, in a dark booth, telling her not to move and not to talk to anyone. She sat there, her hood pulled up, trying to be invisible. The bar was loud, filled with drunken mercenaries and pilots. One of them, a massive reptilian creature with scales and 4 arms, noticed her. He staggered over, a reek of cheap alcohol rolling off him. "Well, well," he slurred, his forked tongue flicking. "What's a little soft thing like you doing in a place like this?" He sat down, sliding into the booth, pinning her against the wall. "Looking for a good time, smooth skin?" "Hey, leave me alone," Cerelia said, her voice a low quiver. "Ooh, feisty." The creature laughed, and all 4 of his hands reached for her at once. One grabbed her jacket, one went for her hair. "I said," Cerelia said, her voice suddenly shockingly cold, "leave me alone." She remembered Mason's training in the freighter. Never fight fair, fight to win. She grabbed the hot, caustic drink on the table and threw it in the creature's face. He roared, his scaled skin sizzling. As he reared back, blinded, she brought her knee up, hard, into his groin. She wasn't human, but the anatomy was close enough. He howled, a sound of pure agony. She slid out of the booth, her heart hammering. "You little wreck," he shrieked, wiping his eyes, his rage overcoming the pain. He pulled a long, serrated knife from his belt. "I'm going to skin you." He lunged. He never made it. Mason was there. He had come in through the back. He moved, not with the frenetic energy of a brawl, but with the cold, absolute purpose of an executioner. He didn't disarm the creature. He didn't warn him. He stepped inside the lunge, caught the creature's knife arm, and used the creature's own momentum to spin him around. Mason's other hand came up, holding a thin black stiletto he'd taken from a bounty hunter. He jammed the stiletto up under the creature's thick, scaled jaw and drove it straight into its brain. There was a wet, soft sound, a single surprised grunt. The creature froze, its eyes wide. It collapsed onto the floor, dead. The bar went silent. Everyone was staring. Mason didn't look at them. He wiped the stiletto on the creature's tunic, sheathed it, and grabbed Cerelia's arm. "We're leaving," he said, his voice like granite. He dragged her back to their room. He kicked the door shut and slammed his fist into the metal wall, leaving a deep dent. "I told you not to move," he roared. "I told you not to talk." "He touched me," she yelled back, her fear and adrenaline finally breaking. Tears streamed down her face, hot and angry. "He was going to... He pulled a knife." "And I killed him," Mason shouted. "And now this whole bar knows you're with me. They know you're here. We're blown. We have to run again." "So this is it?" she cried, gesturing around the filthy room. "This is your world, Mason, running and killing and eating gray paste until someone finally sticks a knife in your brain? This is what you call survival?" "Yes," he said, his face inches from hers. "It is. It's ugly, and it's brutal, and it's not fair, but it's honest, it's real, and that's all I have." "It's not all you have," she screamed, and she hit him, her fists pounding against his chest. "It's not. You have me." His anger evaporated. He just stared at her, his dark eyes wide. She stopped hitting him. Her hand splayed on his chest. She was weeping. "You have me, Mason. You are not alone in this." He looked at her, at this impossible royal creature who had just survived an assassination, a galactic chase, and a bar fight. The woman who had eaten the gray paste because he told her to. He reached up and cupped her face, his rough thumbs wiping away her tears. "Cerelia," he whispered, his voice broken. "I understand now," she whispered, leaning into his touch. "I understand your world. It's brutal. It's unfair, but you are right. It is honest." He didn't kiss her like he had at the palace, in a rush of fury and passion. He kissed her with a slow, deliberate tenderness that was more profound than any fire. It was a kiss of reverence. It was a kiss that said, "I see you." He lifted her and carried her to the small, rickety bed. They made love, not with the desperate, aching desire of the cave or the furious passion of the palace. This was slow. This was deliberate. This was two survivors finding solace in a universe that wanted them dead. Every touch was a question. Every kiss was an answer. He memorized her body with his hands, the golden markings on her skin, the delicate ridge of her spine, the soft fur of her tail, which she wrapped around his wrist as if to anchor him. She memorized his scars, kissing the jagged tissue on his chest, the burns on his back. She was not healing him. She was accepting him. After they lay tangled together in the single bed, the sounds of the bar a distant muffled roar. "I would give it up for you," she whispered into the darkness. "What?" he asked, his voice thick. "The crown, the title, the kingdom, all of it. I would give it all up, just to stay here with you." Mason went very still. He looked at her, at the sincerity in her golden eyes, and he felt a sharp, stabbing pain in his chest. It was love, and it was terror, because he knew, in that instant, that she couldn't. "You can't," he said softly. "Why not? I am no one here. I am just a woman. I am happy." "No." he said, sitting up, pulling the sheet around his waist. You're not. You're a queen. You're just hiding. Rook has the intel, he said, his voice hardening, the soldier returning. He found the source. Threx is just a pawn. He got up and pulled on his pants. He turned on the small data puck Rook had given him. A holographic map appeared. The Consortium of Silence, Mason said, his voice grim. It's real. Rook's contact got inside their network. They're not just funding Threx. They're funding insurrections in 12 different systems. All royal systems. He zoomed in on a list of names. The Hydrus sector, the Xylos kingdom, all of them. The Consortium is a faction of galaxy-wide mega-corporations and anti-royalist fanatics. They believe bloodlines are inefficient. They want to erase all kings and queens, all hereditary rule, and replace it with a board of directors. They want to erase my world, Sirelia said, sitting up, the full weight of it hitting her. My people, my history. They're starting with you, Mason said, and Threx is their puppet. He gets your throne. They get your planet's resources, and they get a foothold in the core systems. Sirelia stood, her nakedness forgotten. She was a queen again. Then we must stop them. How? Mason asked. It's you and me in a slum with a 10 million credit bounty on our heads, and we can't fight that. We cannot run from it, she said. You taught me that. This world, it is brutal and unfair, but it is honest. And the honest truth is that they are coming for us, and they will not stop. Running is not survival. It is just a slow death. He looked at her, at the fire in her eyes, and he smiled. A true, real smile. You're right, he said, when we can't win by running, when we have to go back. Back? Back to Virexa, not to win back your crown, to burn theirs. They will be looking for us. Threx will have the planet locked down. They'll be looking for a princess and her human bodyguard, Mason said, a dark, dangerous idea forming in his mind. They won't be looking for 2 dead people. He grabbed the comm unit. I need to talk to Rook. We need to find a ship, and I need a loyalist. Who in your military can you trust? Absolutely. General Corvus, Sirelia said without hesitation. He was my father's shield. He is old, but he is loyal. Good, Mason said. Contact him. Tell him you're dead. 2 days later, a small, unregistered freighter exploded near the Cathar system. The bounty hunter network lit up with rumors. The Shadowblade and the princess, caught in a fuel line explosion. Threx's forces, who had been monitoring the system, recovered DNA fragments from the wreckage. Rook, for a steep price, had provided very convincing lab-grown DNA. The tribunal quietly rescinded the bounty. The case was closed. On Virexa Prime, General Threx held a public funeral for his beloved cousin, his voice full of false grief as he cemented his power. And in the cargo hold of a smuggling ship halfway to the border, Mason Cross sat in the dark, recording a message. He held the data puck up, his face illuminated by the screen, his eyes burning with a cold fire. Threx, he said, his voice a low, gravelly promise. You wanted a war. You wanted to play with politics and assassins. You should have stayed in your lane. He leaned closer, as if he could see the general through the lens. You wanted war? You summoned the wrong human. Virexa Prime was a planet holding its breath. The lavender sky was choked with the engine wash of Threx's warships, hanging in low, menacing orbits. The coronation parade was not a celebration. It was an occupation. Black banners bearing Threx's stylized insignia hung from the crystal spires, obscuring the ancient seals of the royal bloodline. Squads of androids, upgraded and heavily armed, marched in perfect, terrifying synchronicity down the grand avenues, their metal feet echoing a dead, rhythmic drumbeat. In the shadows of this military spectacle, 2 ghosts returned. They moved through the city's ancient, forgotten underbelly, the maintenance corridors and sewer systems that Mason had memorized. They were no longer a princess and her guard. They were outlaws, clad in dark, functional armor scavenged from Rook's contacts. Cerelia's bioluminescent skin was dampened by a subdermal inhibitor patch, and her golden eyes were hidden behind dark, data-streaming contact lenses. Her tail was bound tightly and hidden beneath the armor. She looked like a different person, hard, silent, and lethal. Mason, beside her, was a shark in his native water. He carried a kinetic rifle, a dozen custom-built explosive charges, and a cold, focused rage. They reached the central nexus, a cavern of humming crystal conduits deep beneath the palace. This was the city's heart. "You remember the plan?" Mason asked, his voice a low rasp over their private comm. "I am not a princess, I am a weapon," Cerelia replied, her voice flat, repeating the mantra he had drilled into her. "I go to the Grand Archive, I plug into the core, I upload the consortium data to the secured list, General Corvus, Lord Valerius, and the other 83 nobles on your maybe loyal list. Then, I release it to the public network. And if you get caught, I fight, I do not get captured, I will not surrender." "Good," Mason said. He gave her a single hard nod. "I'm going to the broadcast grid. Threx wants a parade. I'm going to give him one." They split. Cerelia moved with a silent, fluid grace, disappearing into the archive conduits. Mason turned toward the main power grid. His sabotage was an act of brutal art. He didn't just cut the power, he rerouted it. He moved with practiced, vicious efficiency. His first charge took out the secondary security hub, blinding the android patrols in the southern quadrant. His second charge, a high-frequency pulse device, was placed on the main communications line. He climbed into the primary broadcast station. Threx's propaganda officers staffed the room. Mason was a phantom. 2 men went down from nerve pins to the neck before they even knew he was there. The third he used to access the main console. "To change the broadcast feed," Mason growled, his pistol pressed to the man's temple. "Patch in this data puck, now!" The terrified officer complied. Across the city, the massive holographic screens that lined the parade route flickered. Threx's face, stern and supposedly regal, was replaced by a sterile black-and-white consortium logo. At the same moment, Cerelia was deep within the Grand Archive. She had bypassed the android guards, her new, hard-won stealth skills serving her well. She found the core terminal, a pulsating crystal column that contained all of Virex's history and data. She jammed Rook's interface into a port, her fingers flying across a holographic keypad. "Uploading," she whispered. The data bomb, the proof of Threx's treason, the secret contracts with the Consortium of Silence, the lists of assets to be seized, the plans to dissolve the Virexan government, it all streamed, encrypted, to the private terminals of the Old Guard, to General Corvus on his flagship, to Lord Valerius in his city estate. Then she hit the second key, public broadcast. The parade ground screens, already showing the consortium logo, began to play the audio from Threx's secret meetings. His voice, bargaining away their planet. His contempt for the Virexan people. The crowd, gathered by force to watch the parade, fell silent. The marching androids continued their rhythmic stomp. 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 A single citizen, an old woman with a face like carved wood, threw a stone. It bounced harmlessly off an android's chest plate. The android stopped. It turned. It raised its weapon. And from the rooftops, Mason's second phase began. He had pre-hacked the android's command frequency. He sent a single, simple command: stand by. All across the parade route, 2,000 androids froze in place. The crowd, which had been poised to flee, stopped. They saw the frozen androids. They heard Threx's voice, full of treason, still booming from the speakers. The silence stretched for 1, 2, 3 seconds. It was a man with a Hydra's trade tattoo who moved first. He leaped onto the back of a frozen android and smashed its optical sensor with a wrench. The dam broke. The parade route erupted into a full-scale riot. The people, their fear replaced by a sudden volcanic rage, swarmed the paralyzed androids, tearing them apart with their bare hands. They set the black banners on fire. The carefully orchestrated coronation parade became a revolution. In the palace, Mason smiled. "Phase 1 is hot," he said into his comm. "Get to the throne room. I'm on my way." He turned to leave the broadcast center, and the door hissed open behind him. "Impressive," a voice said. It was synthetic, but it had an echo, a human cadence. "Your tactical disruption is rated at 92% efficiency. A new record." Mason spun, his rifle coming up. It was not an android. It was not a man. It was both. It stood 7 feet tall, its body a blend of black biosynthetic muscle fiber and polished reinforced chrome. It had Mason's build, but magnified. Its face was a terrifying, smooth plate, half human-looking skin, half metal, with 2 glowing red optical sensors. It wore a tactical rig identical to Mason's. "What the hell are you?" Mason asked, backing away. "I am Unit 7, the hybrid said. It moved with a speed that was impossible, blurring to the side as Mason fired. The rifle slug sparked off the wall. "I am the consortium's solution to the Mason Cross problem. I am your replacement." "I'm flattered," Mason growled, dropping the rifle and pulling his pistol and a combat knife. "Your flattery is irrelevant. My primary function is to study your methods. My secondary function is to eradicate you." The hybrid attacked. It was not like fighting an android, all predictable patterns. It was like fighting himself. It used his own moves. It anticipated his dodge, its armored fist catching him in the ribs, cracking 2 of them. Mason gasped, the air driven from his lungs. He ducked under a kick that would have decapitated him and drove his knife into the hybrid's side. The blade met reinforced armor and snapped. "Your CQC tactics are logged. Mason." Unit 7 droned, pulling the hilt from its side. It threw Mason across the room as if he were a child. Mason slammed into a console, sparks showering him. This thing was stronger, faster, and it knew his playbook. He couldn't win. Not in a fair fight. "You're right," Mason spat, blood trickling from his mouth. "You're better, faster, stronger." "Correct," the hybrid said, advancing for the kill. "But you're still a goddamn machine," Mason roared. He wasn't aiming for the hybrid. He was aiming for the high-voltage crystal conduit that powered the broadcast station. He emptied his pistol into the conduit's containment field. The hybrid sensors widened, non-tactical, illogical. "Go to hell!" The conduit exploded. The world turned white. 1 billion volts of raw energy arced through the room, grounding on the nearest, most conductive object. Unit 7's chrome and metal body. The hybrid shrieked, a sound of tearing metal and frying synapses, as the energy cooked it from the inside out. It convulsed, its weapons discharging wildly, and then collapsed, a smoking, molten heap. Mason was blown clear, his armor saving him from the worst of it. He was deaf in one ear. His entire body felt like one giant bruise, and he was pretty sure his arm was broken. But he was alive. He staggered to his feet, grabbing his pistol. "Sloppy," he panted, "but effective." He ran for the throne room. Cerelia had been faster. She had moved through the chaos of the palace, bypassing the confused guards who were getting conflicting orders from Threx and the rioting city. She entered the throne room. It was silent. Threx stood on the dais, his back to her, watching the city burn on a massive holoscreen. He wore his new coronation robes, black and red. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Threx said, not turning. "The fire of purification. It is the fire of your end, cousin," Sirelia said. Threx spun, his cybernetic red eye whirred, focusing on her. He stared, his mouth open. "Ghost, you are dead. I saw the DNA. You saw what a mercenary wanted you to see," Sirelia said. She unlatched her armor, letting it fall to the floor. Underneath, she wore a simple black uniform. "Your deal with the consortium is over. Threx, the people know. Corvus knows. Valerius knows." "Lies," he roared, but his face was slick with sweat. He looked at a side panel. The main broadcast, Mason's feed, had died with the conduit. It had defaulted to the throne room's emergency security feed. He and Sirelia were being broadcast live to the entire planet, to the burning city. "You," he seethed, his arrogance replaced by cornered animal rage. "You did this. You and your primitive." "I am a queen of Virexa," Sirelia said, her voice echoing with all the power of her bloodline. "And you are a traitor. Surrender." "I will not," Threx shrieked. He grabbed the heavy-duty plasma rifle from the stand beside the throne. "I will burn this planet before I give it to you. I will start with you, live for the whole galaxy to see." He raised the rifle, his finger tightening on the trigger. The massive 12-foot-high crystal doors of the throne room exploded inward. Mason stood there, framed in the smoking doorway. He was a vision from hell, bleeding, burned, his arm hanging at a useless angle. He held his pistol in his good hand. Threx turned, startled, swinging the rifle toward the new threat. He was too slow. Mason's pistol barked. A single, heavy kinetic slug crossed the throne room. It wasn't a clean plasma burn. It was a messy, brutal human bullet. It hit Threx in the center of his chest, throwing him backward against the throne. The general looked down at the dark, spreading stain on his new robes. He looked at Mason. He looked at Sirelia. His cybernetic eye flickered and died. He slid to the floor. Dead. Silence. The live broadcast captured it all. The smoking doorway, the monster who stood in it, the dead usurper, and the woman who stood, alive, over his body. The side doors burst open. 20 of the Royal Hearthguard, led by General Corvus himself, stormed in, their lances raised. They stopped, stunned by the scene. They saw Mason, the wanted dead human, and raised their weapons. "Seize him," one captain shouted. "Hold," Corvus commanded. His old grizzled face was locked on Sirelia. Sirelia stood tall. She walked down the steps past her cousin's body. She faced the guards, their weapons, and the camera that was broadcasting her to her world. She was not the frightened girl who had lit the beacon. She was not the refugee who had eaten gray paste. She was furious. She pointed to Threx. "The treason is dead." She pointed to herself. "The princess is dead. I am now the queen." The guards stared, their loyalty hanging in the balance. In the doorway, Mason Cross, his mission complete, his body screaming in agony, watched her. He saw the power she now wielded. He saw the ruler she had become. He did not bow. He did not submit. He was respected. Slowly, painfully, the human assassin, the shadow blade, the monster sank to one knee. He lowered his head, not in service to a crown, but in partnership with a queen. The throne room was a tableau of shattered crystal and shattered power. General Threx lay dead, his coronation robes dark with his own blood. The Royal Hearthguard stood frozen, their lances pointed at the bleeding, one-armed human who was still kneeling, his head bowed. And on the dais, Sirelia stood, her voice echoing in the sudden, terrible silence. "The princess is dead. I am now the queen. General Corvus, His old face a mask of disbelief and dawning respect, was the first to move. He lowered his lance and slammed its base onto the crystal floor. It was a formal salute. One by one, the other guards followed, their weapons lowering, their allegiance shifting in a silent seismic tremor. "Clear the room," Corvus commanded, his voice a gravelly bark. "Secure the palace, get the healers for the Shadow Blade, and someone, by all the stars, turns off that cursed broadcast." Mason pushed himself to his feet, grunting as pain shot through his broken arm and cracked ribs. "I'm fine," he growled. Though the room was starting to spin, he kept his good hand on his pistol. He trusted Corvus. Maybe. He trusted the rest of them not at all. "You are not fine, human," Cerelia said. Her voice was still the Queen's, but her golden eyes were fixed on him, filled with a terrifying, raw concern. Healers. Now. This time Mason did not argue. The days that followed were a blur of stabilizers, biofoam, and agonizingly fast-healing lightweavers. Mason hated it. He hated helplessness. He hated the soft bed and the sterile smell. He was a soldier, and a soldier healed by scarring over, not by being sung back together by magic light. While he was confined to the medical wing, Cerelia rebuilt her world. She formed a temporary council, not just of the old, trembling nobles like Theron, but of new blood. She brought in merchant guild leaders, technicians from the Undercity, and reformed political dissidents. Lord Valerius, to everyone's surprise, proved invaluable. He had known about the consortium for years, he claimed, and had been maneuvering to counter them. He saw Cerelia's revolution not as chaos, but as a refreshing and profitable new market. On the 5th day, Mason was declared healed, though his body still ached. He strapped on his armor, his pistol, his knife. He felt the familiar weight and felt whole again. He found her, not in the throne room, but in the Grand Archive, the place where she had launched her counterattack. She was standing before a swirling hologram of the Andarix galaxy. "They are proposing I be crowned in a week," she said without turning. She knew his footfalls. She knew the sound of his breathing. A full coronation, to stabilize the people. "Good," Mason said. He stood by the door, a shadow in her world of light. "You'll be a good queen. You're not soft, like they are." She turned. She wore a simple white tunic, her hair unbound. She was not the queen. She was Cerelia. "And you? What will you do, Mason?" He shrugged, the movement tight over his repaired ribs. "The contract is void. You're not a princess in distress. You're a queen in power. My job's done." A cold stillness entered the room. "Job done," she repeated, her voice flat. "I'm a weapon, Cerelia. You needed a killer, so you had one. Now you need a diplomat. Oh, you need a politician. That's not me. I'm the guy who breaks things, remember?" He took a step back, toward the door. "I'm leaving. Rook can get me a ship. I'll be gone by morning. No one will even know." She crossed the room in 3 long, silent strides. She stood in front of him, blocking his exit. She had to look up to meet his eyes, but she had never seemed taller. "No," she said. "No. No, you are not leaving." "You can't hold me here," he said, his voice a low warning. "The contract—" "This is not about the contract," she snapped, her control breaking. She shoved him in the chest, her palm hitting his armor. It was like hitting a wall. "This is not about a job. Did you think that's all this was? A mission?" "What else is it?" he demanded, his own voice rising. "I'm a broken soldier from a dirtball planet. You are a queen of 1,000 stars. Look at us. This doesn't work." "I am a woman who was supposed to die," she said, her voice dropping to a fierce, trembling whisper. I was a girl in a cage, waiting for an assassin. I called for help. You came. I'm not what you wanted. You are exactly what I needed. She reached up and grabbed the collar of his armor, pulling him down to her level. You are not a weapon. You are not a tool. You are not my guard. You are what I choose. You taught me how to be honest. You taught me how to fight. You taught me how to be free, and you don't get to leave me now. Sirelia, he breathed, his resolve cracking. He saw the woman from the cave, the woman from the slum, the woman who had cried in his arms. I choose you, Mason Cross, she said. The man, the monster, the human, all of it. I choose you. Your job isn't done. It's just starting. He rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closing. You're making this very difficult. I intend to, she whispered. Their new, fragile peace was interrupted by the intergalactic tribunal. They did not send a hologram this time. They sent a ship, the Proctor, the same crystalline entity as before, arrived with a phalanx of silent, armored enforcers. They met in the throne room. It had been repaired, the broken crystal replaced. Queen Sirelia, Proctor's icy voice droned. You have created a situation? The Consortium of Silence has officially disavowed General Threx, citing him as a rogue agent. They have filed a formal grievance against your planet for the destruction of their property. My property, Mason growled, his hand on his pistol. Unit 7, tell them to send me the bill. The human will be silent. Proctor said, your actions, Queen, while successful, have destabilized this entire sector. The tribunal demands a resolution. The old bloodlines are shaken. They see your ascension, your methods, as a threat. I am a threat, Sirelia said, her voice calm. She sat on the throne, not as a princess, but as a ruler. Mason stood at her right hand, where he belonged. You must provide stability, the Proctor insisted. You must reaffirm the old ways. The tribunal requires you to secure a formal alliance through a consort bond, a marriage. I am not for sale, Sirelia said. This is not a negotiation. The Prince of Hydrus has re-extended his offer. The Xylos Knight is also willing to overlook your indiscretions. Marry one of them. Unite your house with another. Or the tribunal will sanction Virexa, and the consortium will be the least of your problems. I see, Sirelia said. She stood up. You want me to prove I am stable. You want me to reassure the galaxy that the old ways are safe. Precisely, the Proctor said, sensing victory. Then I will make my choice, Sirelia announced. I will address the galaxy and the tribunal in 2 days. I will announce my decision and my new order. The Proctor, satisfied, retreated. The palace was a hive of activity. Lord Valerius was ecstatic, already drawing up marriage contracts, calculating the trade benefits of a union with the Hydrus sector. A brilliant move, Majesty, he'd purred. You appease the tribunal. You gain a fleet and you silence the consortium. Politics is, after all, the art of compromise. Mason watched, silent and grim. He and Sirelia had not spoken of it. He spent the 2 days in the armory, upgrading his weapons. He was preparing for a war. He knew her. He knew she would not compromise. And when she refused, he would be the one to kill the Proctor. The day of the address came. The grand hall was filled. The nobility, the council, the ambassadors. And in the center, a ring of tribunal enforcers, with the Proctor standing like a shard of ice. Billions watched on every feed in the sector. Sirelia entered. She was a vision. She wore the full regalia of her ancestors, robes of woven light that shimmered and changed color. And on her head, she wore the high crown of Ethel, a massive, ancient, impossibly heavy crown of living crystal. She walked to the dais. Mason stood in the shadows just off the stage, his rifle in hand, his armor on. He watched her. She began her address. She spoke of the war. She spoke of Threx's treason, of the consortium's shadow plot. She spoke of the tribunal and their demand for stability. The tribunal believes that stability comes from the past, she said, her voice ringing with power. They believe that power must be held in the hands of the few, passed down through blood, secured by marriage contracts. She looked at the Prince of Hydrus, who smiled expectantly. She looked at the proctor. They are wrong. Stability does not come from clinging to a past that is rotting. It comes from building a future that is honest. I told my council that bloodlines should no longer rule. Those leaders must be chosen. That is the new order for Virexa. The hall erupted in murmurs. The proctor took a menacing step forward. The tribunal demands you name your consort, it boomed. I will, Sirelia said. She looked directly at the main broadcast camera, her golden eyes finding every person in the galaxy who was watching. When my world was ending, she said, her voice becoming quiet, intimate. I did what I was taught. I prayed to the old power. I lit the beacon. I cried for help. She paused, the entire galaxy hanging on her next word. And I found something better than power. She reached up, her hands steady. She gripped the massive crystal crown. Power is a cage, she said. Tradition is a chain. She lifted the crown from her head. It was a gesture of such profound rebellion that the room gasped. She held the symbol of 10,000 years of her family's rule in her hands. I found him. She turned and looked directly at Mason, who stood frozen in the shadows. She walked off the dais toward the edge of the stage and laid the high crown on the floor. An abdication, a declaration. I do not need a consort, she said, her voice raw and real. I do not need a crown. I need a partner, and I have chosen him. She walked past the stunned prince, past the furious proctor, past the gasping nobles. She walked straight to Mason. She took his hand, his human, calloused, scarred hand, and faced the crowd. The tribunal can have the crown, she said. I choose this. I chose him. That is my new order. That is my stability. The proctor raised its weapon. This is anarchy. This, General Corvus shouted, stepping forward with his entire legion, is our queen. Later, the galaxy was in chaos. The Hydrus sector had recalled its ambassador. The tribunal was threatening war. The consortium was silent, which was worse. But the palace was quiet. Mason found Sirelia on the high balcony, the one where she had first slapped him. She had changed into a simple black flight suit. He wore his. You really did it, he said, his voice full of an awe he couldn't hide. You just threw a bomb into the entire galaxy. You taught me how, she said, smiling when she leaned against the railing. They will come for us. Let them, he said. He stood beside her. I'm not going anywhere. He looked at her, at this woman who had just given up a universe for him. The last of his walls, the ones he had built in the Sumter Valley, the ones he had lived behind in his cabin. They crumbled to dust. I never belonged anywhere, he said, his voice thick, the words tasting strange and heavy. Not really, not on Earth, not in the military. I was just a thing, a tool, a monster they pointed at other monsters. I never felt human. He reached out and touched her face, his hand trembling, just slightly. You make me feel human, Sirelia. She covered his hand with hers, pressing it to her cheek. And you, Mason, make me feel like a queen, not a Virexa, just a queen. They didn't need to say anything else. The story ended not in the throne room, but on the loading ramp of a small, fast, unmarked ship. It was the ship Rook had procured for them, the one meant for Mason's escape. General Corvus and Lord Valerius were there to see them off. "I will hold the council," Corvus grunted. "Your new order, it is madness. But it is a good madness. The people are with you. And I," Valerius added, smiling, "will handle the tribunal. They are merely a corporation with a god complex. And I love negotiating with gods. It is, after all, so profitable when they fall." Cerelia nodded, a queen giving her last orders. Then she turned. Mason was waiting at the top of the ramp, his hand outstretched. She was no longer a monarch. He was no longer her protector. They were just two people in practical clothes, about to take on a universe. She took his hand. They walked into the ship, side by side, equals. They were walking into an unknown, star-strewn future, ready to build a world on their own terms. She had cried for help, but the human who came didn't save her. He changed everything.